On this DVD, I'm going to talk to you and show you some wonderful things you can do with camellias. Camellias are a really old-fashioned flower. 1950s, 1960s, they were really incredibly popular. The reason that they don't use them in flower arranging is because you can't buy them as a cut flower. Yet if you have access to a camellia tree, they are the most magnificent flower for winter. No roses are out, and just look at that. The most fantastic flower that should be in every flower arrangement on grey winter days like it is here. So that's what this DVD is about. 6 arrangements using camellias that are modern, contemporary, and again, I'm also going to show you some new techniques. The first thing about camellias is when you pick them, you never pick them and put them in a bucket. Use a big tray. The reason is that they will do 2 things to you if you're not careful. The first thing they'll do is they'll bruise very easily, which means the petals will go brown. But the second thing is they will fall off their stems. Lay them flat onto the tray, trying to avoid any contact whatsoever with any other camellias or anything. They'll be fine out of water if you're only a couple of minutes away from your studio, but it does mean they're going to keep at least a week and are going to look stunning. This one is called a double. You can see it's got heaps and heaps and heaps of petals on it, so it almost looks like a peony. And if this is an astonishing flower that we really should be using so much more. It's really important that you pick the right kind of camellia. Have a look at this one and you'll see it has got a shiny leaf. It's called Camellia japonica, meaning from Japan, but it's the shiny leaf. That is what you're looking for, because the camellias on that type of shrub are the ones that are going to last a long time. This is a Sasanqua camellia. You can tell it's a Sasanqua camellia because it has longer, thinner, duller leaves. These are more delicate camellias, but they are absolutely useless for using in a flower arrangement, as the heads wouldn't last longer than a couple of hours before they fall off. So don't be tempted. Always look for your Camellia japonica. The first design is going to be a Biedermeier. And the reason I've picked a Biedermeier is because it's perfect for this time of the year when there's lots of different varieties of camellias that you can really enjoy all at once, because it does take a lot of flowers. You need to pin the camellias at the back, because otherwise after a day these huge heads will fall off the stem. Going to cut the stem fairly short. Cut off all the leaves and that little bud. 2 pins, they don't have to be sewing pins. Squeeze the calyx there and push the pin through that way, and then again through 90 degree that way. That holds the petals in the calyx, and the petals will stay there for at least a week. The only other danger point then is it falling off this actual stalk here, and that would happen when you have got one that's what we would call full blown, which means completely out. The best ones to pick are ones that are still coming out a little bit. You'll get longer lasting camellias, but also the danger of that isn't quite so bad. I'm going to do a reverse Biedermeier, which means 2/3 is going to be container and 1/3 is going to be the flowers. This is a floral foam ball which I have cut 1/3 off it, and I have soaked it, and it sits perfectly inside the container. Doesn't need any other security. It is sitting there quite heavy, which is an advantage. It means it's not going to fall over, and that's the basis for your Biedermeier. A Biedermeier means rows and rows and rows of contrasting material. So I'm going to start with the very biggest flat camellias at the bottom, and I'm pushing them right in, and this row will go right the way around the base, as even as you can get it. I have done the same thing with the buds. These buds will be out by tomorrow when this arrangement is going to be delivered. What I'm going to do though is put a row of foliage. And I have Coprosma here, which is variegated. I'm going to cut pieces off that, and that will be the second row. And immediately the contrast with the yellow, but also picking up the yellow in the stamens. So with the second layer is now done, and ready for the third. Again, contrast. It's always about the contrast between the layers. So this time the camellia is going to be still a pink, but a single rather than the double. Single simply means there's less petals. There's one row of petals instead of two rows of petals. So there's the third layer finished with contrast, and we're ready for the fourth layer, which is the Ming fern. Ming fern is wonderful. You just cut the pieces off like this and put it in. Once again, picked because it is another interesting contrast, and I'm going to make a layer of that all the way around. The Ming fern in place, creating that texture. We're now ready for another lot of camellias, and this time I'm going to use these ones here. And as you're putting them in, you're facing them outwards. Normally in a bed of mile you have something really spectacular at the top. One amazing centerpiece up there. I have got a beautiful red single camellia, so that is going to be my top piece, just sitting in the top. And there it is. It didn't take very long. A Biedermeier styled arrangement using camellias, ideal for any centre table or even an entranceway really. Big, bold and blousy. This design is ideal as a gift, either for hospital, a friend, or in this case it's going to a rest home for the lady who allowed me to pick her camellias. And for it you're going to need these things. A little palm spade. If you don't have one, a bowl would work just as well. A plastic frog, that's what this little piece of plastic is called, and it has just got prongs on it. A tiny piece of wet floral foam and the plant material. Put some hot glue on the bottom of the frog, no idea why it's called frog, and park it in the point of rest. You can see the spade has a natural part where it wants to sit, so that's where I have put the frog, and then on top of that I can now push my piece of floral foam and it's going to stay there securely. It's not going to move as I carry it around. So that's the very beginning of the mechanic. This design is what I call a classic or a traditional design. It is based on English styles of the 50s. The reason I am using it is because where it's going to a very old lady in a rest home, and she would have loved those styles because those are the styles of her youth. So the first thing you're going to need is different forms, and in this case you need a form that is round and solid, geranium. Modernise it a wee bit, you need a form that we call line material, so something that is long and thin. Then you need what is called transitional material, which means busy, fuzzy, fluffy, and of course camellias that are in proportion to the spade. So if you're using a big spade, obviously you'd use bigger camellias. Once you've done that, it is pretty easy to assemble all the pieces in a way that is tried and tested over many years. The reeds are going to go up and along in an asymmetrical design. So the first set of reeds I'm going to cut possibly on a pleasant angle. And this is called just setting your line. And that's the height, that's the maximum height that it is going to be. And then the other reeds, the other end of these particular ones, which are natives, they grow in drains and swamps. You could do the same thing with steelgrass. Are going to go out this way. That has established my height and my line. We then cover the floral foam by putting in the geranium, and I've picked this one because it's been frosted and so it's given us this brown edge on it, and that brown edge of course works beautifully with the palm spade. So with that covering now, I can add what is called the transitional pieces. This palm spade's gone down, so I'll just put those so that they are lovely and vertical. And this is the Ming fern, and this goes through the geranium and into the floral foam. So it's starting to give us a bit of contrast there and depth. Cut another piece off and pop it in the back here. So effectively now, except for that base piece under there, the floral foam is almost completely gone. We'll have the fern under there as well. I'm going to now add a few more reeds, slightly further in, and on top of that. So this is called giving it depth. So you've got something really interesting to look at there. Shorter, perhaps not quite as scruffy. And push that way. Pick the best camellia, which I have already pinned into the foam, facing the way that the lady will be viewing it, and then another one at the back and slightly forward. So you have it like that. Now I have a wee gap down here, so we hide that. Popping this in. And this is why you don't need too much floral foam, because you don't want to keep on having to find ways of hiding it. Then I'm going to put a final little grouping of these lovely reeds. Just through there, this asymmetrical, classic styled English design. Not classic in the sense that I have modernised it by having these strong pieces here. There was no buds on the camellia, so I'm going to have to use a little modern device for bringing out the colour this way. So you can use a pen, in this case I'm using a flower tube. I'm just creating a little bit of bling here. With somebody with failing eyesight, it's probably a good idea anyway to have bling, because they see colours quite grey compared to younger people's eyes. And see how bringing that little bit of red through there has just brought your eye that way. So I'll do a second one. It's small enough also to go beside her table in her bedroom, and not cause great fuss. And she gets to enjoy the camellias that she left behind when she moved into the rest home. And there it is. A simple little design for 2 camellias. Somebody's going to smile when they see it. And it's very solid for walking with. This design uses 2 other wonderful resources that you have in winter when the camellia's out, and that is exposed sticks from the dogwood, beautiful red, and from the willow. Start with any old vase. This one was purple and cost me $1 from a local shop. I then covered it with glue and tissue paper to get a nice texture on it and painted it. The paint, I went along to a paint shop and matched it as close as I could with the colour of the willow and then painted it all over, and so it's now dry. You also need an old piece of floral foam. That's the full block there. I've just cut the end off it, that you've used lots of times and it's not going to be seen. Some old U-pins, mossing pins, or you can use heavy gauge wire and just fold it into a U. And some sisal. The sisal, if you can, get it the same colour as, or a similar shade to your willow. If not, pick a contrast. So to start, the floral foam goes into here. You can see that there's great big gaps in the side, and I want those filled. So you want the foam so it is on the rim of the container. It doesn't need to go any further. So I'm just going to spend a minute cutting the scraps to size so they'll fit in and fill up those gaps. So it's now well filled in with no gaps. You don't want gaps because you're going to put sticks in here and you want the foam to hold them in place. If you find this is a little hard, you can actually glue these all together. Floral foam, when it's dry, takes glue really, really well so that it's all nice and firm. And then with the sisal, pop it over the top and use the U-pins just to hold it all in place temporarily. If you watch these DVDs regularly, you'll know what I'm going to do next. Use the back of your knife to put all these ends in so that it's tucked right into there, and it gives you a neat edge, and of course the floral foam has completely disappeared. Spend just a little bit of time doing this, and you can tease out the sisal so it goes a bit further, so you don't need very much of it at all. Because you're not wetting it, you can also spray paint it, and you can spray paint it with exactly the same colour as you use to spray paint your vase. It's just like a little bed. If you need to, you can always cut off these bits, and you have it all prepared. The other wee treat I have are these thank you test tubes. You may or may not be able to find them. If not, don't worry about it. But this arrangement is going to a netball coach at the end of the season, and so she's going to receive it in a great big ceremony. So when I put the fresh camellias in, they will actually go into these tubes. With this sort of arrangement, which is a horizontal arrangement, you always have to start in the middle and work out to the edges, or otherwise you're going to find you get yourself into all sorts of problems. So this is the first willow going in, and I'm wanting it to be quite horizontal, don't really want lots of sticky bits in it, so I'm just taking off those bottom bits before I add the next one. And I am going to mix up the two different colours. I don't want anything that's curved like this, so that comes off, and I want them basically the same height. So then when the next one goes in, it gives that one a cuddle, and you push that one in. We're making a forest, a little forest of sticks. Because you are using dry foam, you can use hot glue with it. This particular arrangement is going to be carried and knocked, all sorts of things. So as I make a hole in the foam here, I'm then pulling it out again, putting in a little dollop of hot glue, and then putting in the stick. This keeps it really, really secure, and I can still push the sisal around there so the foam is covered. I have covered these test tubes with just a little bit of greenery really, and use double-sided sellotape to put it on. It's just to hide them a little bit. They come free when you buy orchids and things like that, and I'm putting them into the very middle here, so when I put in the fresh plant material I can thread them down into these two test tubes that are in the middle, and they will disappear completely in our forest. And I'm now just going to work with this pile here of sticks and put them all the way through as dense as I can make it. Whenever you're doing something for an event, it's always really, really important to consider utility, how they're going to actually survive, the people who carry them and present them. What's wonderful about this design, it's in place of a bouquet. The Pyral community has really taken under its wing the idea of using arrangements rather than paper wrap bouquets for presentations. Just using my finger to move that sisal around and out of the way. And hoping that they all point towards the middle, and there aren't too many pieces sticking in a wayward fashion. A forest of red. Because the glue's there, it's also wonderful because I can pop the sisal around the glue. At this stage, these two flower files that I put in here are about to become inaccessible, so this is when you fill them with water. And also just tease some of the sisal up around the tubes a bit so it is really, really integrated in the middle there before you carry on adding more. See how that one starts to disappear with that? Compare it to this one that is still standing up straight and tall. So fill them up with water and then carry on. I'm going to use leucodendron to add some colour. What's wonderful about it is it has a red stem, so it's going to go perfectly with this very cool winter arrangement. And I have to put them in now because if I don't, I'm not going to have access to these flower tubes. Strip the leaves just off the part that's going to be in the test tube in the water, and then thread this down through into the tube. These will become part of the middle of the arrangement, and purposely have got 4 of them on one branch so they go off in all directions. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this branch here. I've cut it on an angle and they're in that way, and they will last in water like that for several weeks. I've got some smaller ones here, It's an all-round arrangement, and with those in place I can now carry on building my stick forest. Because I'm getting quite close to the edge in this particular vase, I'm also going to insert the first of my thank you test tubes. This will have a camellia in it, so just make a mark in there and push it down so you can still see the thank you there, and keep on building. At this point I can now take these U-pins out because the sticks themselves are holding the abaca in place. I've now put in the little thank you test tubes. You might just put ordinary ones there. It's a nice touch if you can find them. At this point, do a little bit of pruning. If you've got pieces that are sort of not really acting in the interest of the whole design, just cut them off. We want the pieces to be as horizontal as we can, so you can see pieces like this aren't really contributing to that horizontal look. All they're doing is making it look a little messy, so if they're not doing their job of making that design go upwards, they get moved or they get cut off. And not only will this make the design look cleaner, it makes it less confusing with more with tension in it. It's now time to fill these thank you ones, and I've also cut some camellias so they have a long stem on them. This is normally not done, so you have to make sure they're very well pinned through here, and these ones are going to create some height through to the design. So I've got one long one slightly smaller, a third one, and then two very short ones which will go at the base. Thread it down through and push it down into the tube. If you need to, like this one, you can tie it back there. I have got red paper covered wire, and you can just tie it around the stem like that. Cut it short. Is fabulous for floral art, just for keeping things like that in place. If I was designing these in the spot where they were going to stay, I mightn't have to do this quite as much, but I know that these are going in a car to a function, so we don't want them turning up all in the wrong place. And we keep going round. Put another one here, and a little tiny small one here, and I have one small one left to share that tube with it, and it's in there. So there it is, all round arrangement to go into somebody's coffee table. Now just to finish, I'm going to get the paint out again. I'm going to just paint over these little spots of white, and also on the tips here where you can see where I've cut, particularly that one there, so that they're not showing up as big spots of white on it. This design is a classic Belgian styled piece, and it's perfect for camellias. You're going to need some panel pins, which are really little nails, and also some long-lasting leaves. I'm going to be using the Magnolia grandiflora because it's plentiful and it is double-sided. I can use either side and it just lasts for years. Also a sphere, a large floral foam sphere. I have wet it and I have cut a third off it, and whereas in the other design I used it this way, this time I'm actually going to use it that way, and I want it to sit like that, so I'm going to create a flat bottom on it. As simple as that. And there's the flat bottom. It works really well once it's wet, and that means it's now going to sit. The flowers will go in it and it will just sit there perfectly. The first thing I'm going to do now is cling film the base. The reason I'm doing this is this is wet, ready for the camellias, but I don't want this wetness to penetrate into the leaves because they will rot quite quickly. They need to stay dry to have that long-lasting quality. Put the cling film down on the surface and then cut it so it's going to go right up the side there. And then gather it up so it does cover right up to what will be the rim of the design. Just hold it in place temporarily with these mossing pins. Now the water won't be able to get into that, and we put it back on its little flat base and we're ready to start work on it. Using the brown side of these leaves, I'm picking ones that are of similar size for the top, and this is to just make the top pretty really before we create the pattern underneath, so that it overlaps. Now you see the natural inclination is to go that way, so we are working a little bit away from nature, but you can sort of pop them and they will go into place. It's almost velvety on the side. The panel pins need to form a pattern for it to look as if it should be right. So you'll notice there's a line here where I bashed it into a pot to try and get it a nice even rim, and I'm going to use that as my line marker to put the panel pins in around the line and then overlap them. Now you can overlap it so you could see the pin, or you could use the overlap to hide the pin. It's entirely up to what your sense of aesthetic is. See how it just popped inwards there? And a huge amount of leaves that you could use for this task. Just test them all that you've got. The key to finding them is ones that really, really look very tough. Camellia leaves are perfect for this. They're just a lot smaller, so it's going to take you longer. Keeping it as much of a repetitive pattern as I can, and keeping these leaves in a similar size. So that now has been done right the way around. Got a little plastic container to act as a little plinth because I'm now going to work on it upside down. That's just going to give me a chance to get to this underneath part. I've also marked where my bottom is with a little gold piece of wire there, so I know that that is where all of these leaves are heading towards, because I'm going to make a pattern, and I don't want the pattern to end up here when that's actually the bottom. I've also picked Magnolia grandiflora leaves that are much smaller than the first lot, because we're going to get smaller and smaller as we go towards my bottom. Alright, so we're going to start the second row, bend these two over and place that one between them, and this time I'm going to put the nail right in the middle here, so it's in line with that one, and that'll be my pattern heading up towards the base. Choose your own pattern, obviously, how you want to do it. This also works if you chop them all up into little squares. Alright, so bend them down. A closer look at what I've done. You can see at the top here I've just put a little ring of the panel pins. That is my flat piece, and then small leaves radiate out from there, and then They get bigger and bigger as they go down. I'm now going to wrap it in cling film, and this will flatten it. I mean, if there's no hurry for this work, it's not going anywhere for a couple of days, it'll hold like this for a week, longer. Pull it fairly tight down. The aim of it is to flatten those leaves and set them in place. If you're generous with the cling film, it will make it even more effective. And over the top and cut it off. So this is the big reveal. It has been 24 hours, I suppose, a wee bit longer, and you can see how it has flattened it quite considerably. Now, if it's not flattened it as much as you would like, you can also glue any pieces down, like these ones here, with hot glue. This type of tough material really takes it. So I will spend just a moment or two with little dabs of the hot glue, places that I'm not too happy that it's not going to pop out. When you've removed all of the glue strings and you're happy that it's quite solid, you can carry on creating the pattern with the nails. I'm going to make quite a deliberate line of them here. It means that the ones that are acting as mechanics also become part of the design element, and this is it. The shiny tips of the nails are a nice contrast to the dullness of the leaves, and do the same up on this top row here. And then we're ready to take it off its plinth and turn it over. We know that that's the flat side, so off it comes. That's the base, and put it on there. If you want, you can give it another little bang to really flatten that edge, and we are ready now to add the flowers. It's like a little offering. See there, we can still see a wee bit of cling film, so just use the back of your knife to tuck it in a bit more. Isn't it lovely how from this side you're seeing the green parts of the leaves, yet from the back you're seeing the brown, so you've automatically got a contrast. So this time I'm going to use succulents because they're shiny, lavender because it's dull, and Daphne because it's round, picking up the red of the camellias, and the smell is divine. So this will be quite a smellathon when it's finished. So I'm going to start with the biggest things in first, what happens to be the succulents. Cut them on an angle. Belgium style is groups of 1, 2, 3. Occasionally you'll see a 5. And low. Right, the next thing to go in will be the Daphne. I'm leaving the leaves on because it's a nice contrast, pushing them in quite deep. Right, to make the lavender stronger visually, put them in little groupings of 3s, 5s and 8. It's just they have more presence that way. And of course the grey base of them can also go in. I'll just put a little bit of lavender in before we see how much room we've got left after the camellias are in. pushing them in from the bottom of the stems of the lavender because they are quite soft sometimes. Almost don't need the camellias, it's all would be lovely with little ones, wouldn't it, on there? Now the camellias, they're already pinned, short stemmed, and I've picked quite a variety. See, in the camellia world there's a huge variety of shapes and sizes of all these. Experts would know all their names. All I need to do is now fill in any of the gaps that I've got there with some more daphne or some more lavender or some more succulents to fill it in so you can't see the foam, but so that it gives it this wonderful lush look as they go from I wonder what's over there to oh wow, and it all opens up to you. This design is ideal for a coffee table with a candle in the middle of it, or for the dining table. It's a small little wreath ring and it has plastic on its base. The only problem with it is that it has this plastic lip here, and that has to be removed for us to have things flush with this. So I'm using these cutters which have got a beautiful point on them, and it's very easy just to cut that piece off. Be very careful if anyone's standing near you because they do fly, and perhaps even safety glasses if you think it's going to fly into you. Also this inside lip here. It's not too hard if you've got the right implement, you just make the cut and hack away. It can be a wee bit of a mission with this inside, particularly with such a small wreath ring, but you will get there in the end and cut it all through. Now it needs to be wet, so you put it in a basin, a sink, a baby bath, that way up, and wait till it sinks so that this is completely wet. While you're waiting for that to happen, you can be preparing the next stage. We're going to be lining the outside areas with bark, and I have gum bark because that is readily accessible for me, but in northern hemisphere countries you get birch bark, which is just as beautiful. If you can't find bark at all, you could also use seed pods for this, and the bark is going to be going around here, so just cut it into the lengths you need so that once we get started we can begin to glue it all on. Just like flowers and foliage, bark also has a natural inclination of the way it wants to go. That way it's going to snuggle in, that way it's leaning out. So that way, if you like the colour of the bark, it's going to be much easier to hot glue onto the plastic. Push it on. Probably takes 5 seconds with a good push and it's glued in. Overlap them as you go. It makes for a really, really interesting texture. And do this right round the rim and in the middle part as well. This technique can also be done with leaves, Magnolia grandiflora of course, camellias, lamb's ear. It's very quick and simple, especially if you've cut the bark. I also don't mind these top bits not being level. I think it adds to the rustic look of it. So I'm going to go right round and it's quite heavy now because of the water in it. I've completed the inside and the outside circle, and I found these two lovely twirly bits. So I've decided just to glue them in there because it then integrates the bark on the edges with what's inside. You won't see much of them, but it's just a little thing. If you're lucky enough to find some twirly bits, do things like that with them. Okay, the first thing to do now is to what's called base it. Any foliage will do this. The key is contrast. I have picked a random piece of leaf that I have no idea what its name is. I suspect it was even planted by the birds, and the reason I picked it is because it's dull and round, and it's going to be a contrast to the little leucodendron I'm going to put in and to the pink and white camellias. And these are placed randomly. Their main job is to create a base onto which everything else is put, and at the same time to hide the floral foam. I'm choosing little end tips because they're smaller, and this is quite a small design. You get more leaves on the ends, so it's quicker to do. You're not putting them in one leaf at a time. Because I'm using garden materials here, you have to make sure no spiders, ants, dead leaves go in. When I do these designs for the community, they get them extremely cheaply because they're not paying for plant materials, and it's our way of introducing flower arrangements into the community in an affordable way until they're quite used to the idea that you have flower arrangements when you have a dinner party or you're celebrating an occasion for some reason, and it's working. So all of these arrangements are made with garden flowers from the Flora Design magazine garden, or even from the garden of the person who has paid for the arrangement to be done. So that's just that basing there. It hides all the edges and just integrate things in. The good thing about the leucodendron again is it's got that red piece on there, which is going to go well with the background of that camellia. So we then put these in as well. Random. Try not to create a pattern. If you want to be very contemporary, put them in groups of 2s and 3s. It really does give you a clean looking design. This is quite a small dwarf leucodendron that grows along the ground. It's adding another texture, the texture of the leucodendron compared to the round, darker of the leaves there. So it's already interesting, and you can see how I've placed the foliage inside the curls there. So it's starting to be integrated. Now I've already pinned these camellias on the back, and so they now can go straight in. Keep everything low. This is European style, we're not going high. The end has been cut blunt off the shrub. Make sure you always cut it on an angle. Take that little knob off. That allows more water to come into that piece. So you can see how it's looking. And now I simply need to find another texture. I'm going to take something that's very, very tizzy. It's mignon fern I'm going to use. You can see it is a contrast with that. It's still that lovely light green, and it is an ideal way to fill in any little gaps where you can still see the floral foam. Working on this Lazy Susan is really wonderful because if you do it yourself, it allows you to view it from all sides as you work, and you immediately see where the gaps are. And suddenly it looks very pretty and very finished. Do a final check that there's no glue trails or floral foam showing. All of your bark is secure. It's ready to be presented to somebody for them to go, oh. This arrangement is destined for the the top dog at the awards ceremony. So we've decided on green and white. Green and white was always chic and gives a really good impression, as well as being modern, contemporary, and it looks very, very clean and tidy. The first thing you're going to need is some sort of tall container. It could be glass. I like recycling things, so this is the container that the DVDs actually come in, and it is ideal because this arrangement is going to be round. So something like this, all it's going to do is hold water and you won't see it. You're also going to need something to put around it. I'm choosing equisetum, which is in plentiful supply, but you could even do this with driftwood, because we're going to connect them all together with a technique known as tatami. Tatami is a Japanese technique that they use for their tatami mats. So you're also going to need either paper covered wire or reel wire, which means a wire on a reel, or decorative wire like this one. I'm of course choosing green. The event is taking place at night, so a little bit of bling for the night. The other thing you're going to need is something to cover this container in case you can see through to it. So I'm using old aspidistra leaves, and with a little bit of black wire I am going to cover it. This is just black reel wire. Tie it tight by twisting it. Then go back the other way and add another piece of aspidistra. And it goes. And I'll put a third piece on as well. Cover that gap there. It looks rough and ready. It is rough and ready. But it's really, when you'll see when we finished, why. It's just no need for it to be glamorous. It's not going to be seen. Take it down to where the original piece was, twist it round, and a third piece of aspidistra around the top there, and that is going to be ready for the next layer. Now the tatami wiring itself, you need to have it so that you have a beginning and an end. So twist it, and that is going to be your beginning. You put the piece of equisetum in. Right, so you're pushing it between it like that, and then either using your hands or pliers, give it 1, 2 twists, and then add the next piece of equisetum. Now you'll get into a rhythm. The first couple you'll find you're quite awkward with, but then you get into a rhythm and you just go twist, twist, and add the next piece. Now I'm going to show you, believe it or not, how to sit. I know it sounds ridiculous. Sit face on to the table. Line up all your reeds just above where you're working. So you're like this. Then all you're going to have to do is, as you add your next piece, you just bring it down into it and make the twist. Not only is this faster, but it also sets the rhythm. Bring it down and it goes, make the twist. The more twists you do, the more gap there's going to be between each piece of reed. And if you have large gaps like this, you're probably going to have to go through around your container twice. As you go, keep measuring to see has it gone around your container yet, and that will tell you just how many pieces of reed, whatever you're using, you'll need. And that is the last piece of equisetum that I need. Now, don't cut these pieces off just yet. The first job you have to do now is decide on the height that you want the reeds to reach and pull down them until you've got that height approximately. So that will make this bottom part uneven across here. Measure it again against where you want it on here, so it's about here. Measure that length, which is 110 millimeters for me. Cut 110 millimeters. It's going to be your cut mark for all the lengths to go to the bottom, and you want to cut them straight across because this is going to be sitting on the surface. So if they're all 110, you're going to have a nice piece of tatami wiring at the bottom that is straight, but also you've already pulled through the reeds so that the top is also at the height that you want it. Now I've got the bottom of the container there, and I'm going to roll. When I get to this point here, I'm going to make sure that those two pieces of wire go between the wiring there, and I'm going to keep rolling. And now onto my second layer. And it goes to there. Now when I get to there and it's nice and tight, I'm going to put one of the pieces of wire around the underneath one, and one of the pieces of wire around there, and just temporarily twist it once, still not turning it off, cutting it off. And I'm going to lift it up and put a bang down, seeing that all these little bits of this equisetum have now gone down to the base. And this is where you adjust anything that you need to adjust, and I'm looking now for these two pieces that I made sure were coming out either side of one of the pieces of equisetum. There it is, this one here. Because that's now going to attach the underneath end to the top end. I'm just leaving it temporary because I'm still making sure that these are all nice and straight. Nature has a habit of wanting to put a spiral on things. I don't want a spiral. When I'm pulling them down, making sure they're in order. Pop it on the Lazy Susan so you can see the base there. Just a little, looking for any pieces that aren't working quite right, and just adjust them. You can see now why you have that aspidistra underneath. Just for any gaps. Right, when you're happy that everything's beautiful and straight, wipe the way around, gather yourself another piece of the same wire. Sometimes two pieces looks really good too. You're wanting to join the wire at the same place as where you've joined it here, so it's neat and has a back. Come right round. I'm using two pieces just for the decorative effect. And now to the bottom there and tie it once, twist it once there. I'm not going to tighten it yet with pliers because I've got to check that it's straight. And I'll do that with a ruler. I'm going to put another one just below the container's rim. Right, so now I can tighten all the ends, measure all this, keep them all, have them all nice and tidy. Once I'm happy, pliers, twist it off and cut it off. In goes my rock into the middle, and the water. The water has got in it flower food just to make these flowers last longer, and I'm only filling it up to about here because it's going into a car and we don't want it to spill in the car. flowers I'm using are white camellias, narcissus, sometimes called early cheer, daffodils, lilies and snowdrops, because it's just the beginning of spring here. This camellia I have picked as long as I can off the shrub, left the bud on as well, and you put it through and into the water. Now you can pin these into place. Use a pin that has got a little white head on it, and that way it carries on the white theme through the camellia stalk, through the equisetum, not through your finger. White camellias are notorious, they go brown very quickly, just like some roses do. You can actually see through to check that they're in the water. So we've now got this bold form, so we can now add something that's a little more tizzy. Having the 2 rows of equisetum makes it much easier to get things through and holds them in place. But you can also pin these in place, easier than pinning the camellias actually. Cut some long, cut short, start off them as long as you can make them, because you really do want to have them as far up as you can. Then we change the contrast again with the daffodils, and these are white daffodils. So wherever they look, they're going to get a change of form. Working on the turntable gives you plenty of choices. Now big bold forms, and they're going to go higher again. So we'll thread them right down into the middle. Oh, you just hear it. Shorter ones, so we find a space where shorter will work well. And then the snowdrops. I've got very, very dainty little stems, but the problem with snowdrops is they do that. I have found some very tall lilies to bring the flowers up to the top as much as I can, and there it is, done. Very modern European design, smells divine. All of the spring flowers are in water. They don't like floral foam anyway, so water is ideal for them, and you can do this with any different forms. It's the forms, the difference in the forms, the contrast in the forms that makes it work so successfully, and of course the smell is amazing.